morning. Today we're back here at the Chickamauga battlefield on the south end of the battlefield to talk a little bit about the fighting that happened in the Viniard Field throughout the afternoon of September 19th, the second day of the fighting. So today we're going to learn about some names you're familiar with, some names you may not be familiar with, but I'm excited to share with you the story of the fighting around the Viniard Field. Before we get started with the fighting here around the Viniard Field, I wanted to catch everybody back up to speed with what had happened on the morning of September 19th, 1863. The second day of the fighting, really the first full day of fighting, and all that fighting occurred to the north of us, in the woods and fields, starting in the northeast section of the today battlefield, and kind of slowly moving south as each side was trying to find the other army's flank, their side. And if you kind of imagined a big zipper with the closed end at the bottom, it just kind of zipped down, and these forces would move together and just kind of meet each other happenstance in the woods as they were trying to find the flanks. About mid-afternoon on September 19th, 1863, Jefferson C. Davis's Union Division of the McCook's 20th Corps was ordered from the Widow Glenn's house, which was the Army of the Cumberland, William S. Rosecrans headquarters, to move across the fields of the Brock Farm here and the Vineyard Farm, and to post in these woods, and again, to try to find the flank of the Confederate Army that they thought was somewhere in this area. Jefferson C. Davis's division consisted of the brigades of George Carlin and Hans Christian Hegg. Carlin's brigade would be posted to the field just south of where we're now standing, and Hans Christian Hegg's brigade would be posted here. Hans Christian Hegg is an interesting character, an ardent abolitionist throughout the pre-war years. He came from a town in Norway, immigrated with his family in the late 1840s. And they settled in Wisconsin amongst a Scandinavian community. And he soon found himself to be colonel of the 15th Wisconsin, known as the Scandinavian Regiment. Hans Christian Hegg was elevated to brigade command here at the Battle of Chickamauga. His brigade had seen a lot of action at the Battle of Stones River, which was on the last day of December 1862 and the first couple of days of January 1863. Hans Christian Hegg, prior to the war, like I said, was an ardent abolitionist who was the leader, one of the leaders in the Wisconsin chapter of the Wide Awakes, which was an activist group, part of the Republican Party, really against slavery of any form. And so Hans Christian Hegg had a lot on his mind. You may remember his name. He was in the news about 4 or 5 years ago now, when in June of 2020, his statue that was located in Madison, Wisconsin, was vandalized by protesters and rioters during some unrest that was sweeping the United States in that summer. His statue was pulled down, was decapitated, and thrown into a local pond. Officials were able to rescue the statue, and they have now, or since, placed it back on its pedestal in Madison so it can be enjoyed. And you can learn the true story of Hans Christian Hegg and how he was opposed to slavery. We've now moved a little bit deeper into the woods where Hegg's brigade was lined up in line of battle, which meant they would have been stretched kind of the way my arms are positioned, moving through these woods. Again, they thought the Confederates were somewhere in front of them. They just weren't sure exactly where. So as Hegg's men moved through these woods, about 200 or 300 yards directly behind me to your front, Hegg's brigade crashed into the Confederate brigade of Gregg. Now, Gregg's brigade were positioned on a slight little hill. They'd been there throughout the morning. Were able to throw up a crude line of breastworks, nothing terribly elaborate. So when Hegg's men hit, it was just like a crashing of waves. And so both sides reeled from the effect of that. This was some of the thickest woods on the battlefield. It was not only old standing timber, but also a lot of scrub oak and underbrush here. So it was difficult to see. The soldiers said they could only see about 20 yards or so. So these two brigades really came upon each other pretty quick when the fighting occurred. So the fighting here really kind of seesawed back and forth throughout the early afternoon, and Hegg's brigade was finally forced to push back to about where I'm located now, to the side of an old log schoolhouse that was here on this property. And some of the men barricaded themselves in the log schoolhouse. And as Gregg's men approached, the fighting here was just terribly severe. Casualties on both sides really started climbing up. Hegg's brigade in particular took a lot of casualties. Gregg's brigade was kind of split into half because the right wing was trying to stay attached to the left side of the brigade to their north. And so a lot of troops were pulled off from there. A couple of regiments faced Hegg's brigade here in the woods, fighting throughout the woods. One soldier in Hegg's brigade, a member of the 8th Kansas, quoted, "The roar of battle became one steady, deep, jarring thunder. Hegg had inadvertently stirred up a hornet's nest, and despite his best efforts to move them forward again, his men were soon in full retreat, stumbling back through the woods toward the Lafette Road." Now, the Lafette Road, as you can probably see some cars going behind the camera now, is about 50 yards from where I'm standing. It was the major north-south thoroughfare in this area, and the road that a lot of the fighting was taking place around. Again, the Confederates were coming from the east. The Union Army of the Cumberland was on the west, and they kind of met here, trying to find each other's side. So we'll move a little bit further down into the Viniard Field, talk a little bit about George Carlin's brigade, and take it from there. We've now moved into the Viniard Field. The Viniard Field proper, East Viniard Field, as it's known by modern accounts. The Vineyard House would have been right, I think you might be able to see the sign for it right in that grove of trees. This area where the house was there weren't any trees there at the time of the fighting. And let's talk a little bit about the field size in 1863. You'll see today that there are woods to my left. That's approximate size of the 1863 wood line. The wood line to the south, that would have gone about 200 yards farther south. And then the wood line to the east, that would have been about 200 or 300 yards further to the east. So at the time of the fighting in 1863, the Vineyard Field was noticeably larger than it is now. And again, the trees here around the house would not have been here. So you would have a clear line to the tree line in the very far distance where another Union position was that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But through the Vineyard Field, this was the scene of, again, of a lot of back and forth fighting throughout the afternoon of September 19th, 1863. George Carlin's brigade, one of the brigades in Jefferson C. Davis's division, moved up into the Vineyard Field and started making his way across kind of like at an angle. And as he was coming through here, he started taking fire from Confederates to his front. And suddenly, to his right rear, appeared another Union brigade that he didn't know who it was. So he rode up and tried to find out what troops they were. And this was part of Barnes' brigade from another Union division. And Barnes's men had continued to move up. Unbeknownst to them, there was a brigade of Confederate troops, mainly from Florida, one regiment from Virginia, under the command of a guy named Trigg, who were in the wood lines to the east. And as Barnes' men moved up, Trigg's men unleashed a furious fire on their right flank, their right side, and forced Barnes's men to pull back, to the south and to the west. So Carlin's men were up here on this slight rise. You can see the battery position to the right. And his men were engaged here again in this constant back and forth as the Confederates under Robertson and then Benning emerged from the tree line and eventually pushed Carlin's men back through the Viniard house and the yard of the Viniard house and back into the field beyond where they would regroup. So let's move a little bit to a different location and we'll discuss some more. We're now in position where in the mid to late afternoon of September 19th, the federal forces under Haig and Carlin were forced back to this area. Again, they're meeting tough resistance coming through the woods from the Confederate brigades of Robertson and Benning, and they're being forced back through the Viniard farmyard, which would be right to my left, and through this area where we are now, and they would regroup. They would surge forward, attack, forced to fall back to this position, and eventually it was too much for them. So they moved back into the woods or into the field directly behind the camera here, where they would regroup. It's during about this time frame that Colonel Hans Christian Haig is mortally wounded. He is shot in the stomach, and he is moved to a hospital down near the town of Crawfish Springs, where he would die early the next morning. So as the Union Army are forced to reform here in the fields, you have another Union line under the brigade. It's a brigade under the command of Colonel John Wilder. His men are posted in the tree line that you can see in the distance. You'll see some of the monuments in that tree line. His men are posted there, and they have been there all morning. So they've had the ability to build up a crude line of breastworks using fence posts, rails, fallen trees, things like that, to give them some type of protection. And that's a formidable line. Now, the neat thing, or the interesting thing about John Wilder's brigade is they are armed with the Spencer 7-shot repeating rifle. So although he's a brigade in size, his men could lay down a terrific amount of firepower. He also made the decision to mount his men. So early in 1863 in the spring, his brigade became mounted infantry. So they would ride to the battle on horseback and then dismount and fight as infantry. And armed with those Spencers, that's a tremendous benefit. On the flip side of that, every fourth man, so basically he was down 25% because they were sent to the rear to hold the horses, just like a cavalry regiment. But still, his men here were heavily armed and were able to protect those Union troops that were fleeing back through this field, and really kind of held the Confederates at bay in and around the Viniard house at this point. So as the soldiers under Haig's brigade, Carlin's brigade, and Buell's brigade are reforming in the field here and around the Viniard house, Robertson's and Benning's brigade continue to push to the west, coming from the wood line across from the Lafayette Road. So the fighting here was very intense. Wilder's men positioned here in the wood line are laying down a tremendous amount of firepower with their Spencer rifles. Buell, Carlin, Haig's men are able to move through the line and to reform in the woods directly behind Wilder's position. Robertson's men are pinned down, horrible losses around the Viniard farm, and they finally try to take shelter into a ditch. A ditch that's in dry weather is nothing. It's simply that, a wide ditch. In wetter weather, there's small amounts of water in there. The summer of 1863 was extremely dry, but the ditch was deep and it was wide. So it made good protection for the soldiers to use. So they posted themselves along the ditch, firing at Wilder's men. I want to talk a little bit about probably some of the most horrific fighting that took place here in the Viniard Field. As we said earlier, there was a wide and deep ditch right behind the Vineyard Farm house that Robertson's and then Benning's men took shelter in. And they really had pretty good protection from Wilder's men posted here in the wood line. But one of the battery commanders who was attached to Wilder's brigade, the 18th Indiana Light Artillery, under the command of Captain Eli Lilly. Now, the name Eli Lilly may register with most of you. After the war in the 1870s, he would go on to found the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, now known as Lilly Industries. That company for decades bore his name, Eli Lilly. So that's just a little tidbit there. Lilly's guns were interspersed amongst Wilder's men in sections of 2 guns. His leftmost section was right here behind me now. Lilly ordered those 2 guns to move up about 50 yards to where they could rake the entire length of the ditch. And they would shoot canister rounds, which were small balls about the size of a cat's eye marble, with dozens in a canister. So they would triple charge these. So it's acting like a big shotgun. And they're firing it down the length of the ditch. Just hundreds of casualties in Benning's brigade by the men who were hunkered down in the ditch. So this went on for quite some time. And Colonel John Wilder, looking at this destruction of the Confederates, said, "At this point, it actually seemed a pity to kill men so. They fell in heaps, and I had it in my heart to order the firing to cease, to end the awful sight." Lilly's men, after the destruction of Benning's brigade, pulled his guns back to this location, and that effectively ended the fighting here around the Vineyard Farm.